Hello everyone and welcome to Pen Testing, a short course presented by IT Masters on behalf of Charles Sturt University. My name is Guy Coward and I'll be your MC for the duration of this course. Your mentor is Jeremy Koster, who I will introduce shortly. Before we begin, some housekeeping as usual. All webinars for this course will be held at 8:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Savings Time, with recordings made for those of you who cannot attend on a given night. Despite this, if you can make it, we hope you'll attend the live webinars and contribute to a collaborative learning environment. As you can see in here, we use Zoom for our webinars. We encourage the asking of questions and the use of chat during the webinar, and there are two ways to do so. We ask that you direct all course content related questions to the Q&A section, and Jeremy and I will get to those as we go through the webinar, and that you send all administration type questions to the support team in chat, course details, I guess, timelines and those sorts of things. You can chat with panelists only, that is your hosts and IT Masters folk, or to your fellow students as well. And you can make that choice by toggling through the drop-down box once you have opened the chat log. And given there's already 920 of you, that chat will be going quite quickly. So if you miss something, I'm terribly sorry. Just drop it in again if it's important. In any case, there are usually some very experienced industry-based attendees who will be most helpful with any queries you may have, or at least we'll be lobbing some disgraceful zingers, which are always a highlight of our short courses. We'll have official Q&A sessions periodically, or if there's a particularly relevant question, I'll interrupt Jeremy during his presentation. For those of you who have never taken part in a short course with us, I should say, and that's 40% of you, by the way, IT Masters is a training organisation that exists as a partner to Charles Sturt University, who we work with to create and deliver a number of their master's courses. We also market these courses on their behalf and think and hope that the best way to do so is to give some of it away free. If we do a good enough job, then students will be encouraged to enrol in the full masters if it suits them. With all that said, I really hope that this short course stands alone in its own right and is its own reward. We want you to learn something useful, have some fun, and hopefully make connections with your fellow students in this short course. Chantal and Sophie are around tonight in an administrative and technical support role for IT Masters. Angus sends his love and will be back for the next short course, but not for this one. It's for those of you that will miss his banter on the chat, as they say. They are all responsible for the learn.itmasters.edu.au website, or the course page, which is where you'll find all of the other materials needed for this course, whether it's readings, discussion forums, quizzes, or labs. We'll go into details about the lab shortly, so please hold your questions until later. And in any case, if you have any questions after the webinar, please feel free to contact us using the details on that course page, a link for which I'll soon paste up in the chat. Next week, a representative from CSU, Jason Howarth, will talk a bit about the institution and give you an idea of what studying with them is all about, as well as an idea of how these short courses can help you in completing a postgraduate course. So if you have any questions about that, please hold them over to next week and Jason will answer them. But now it's time for your mentor. Jeremy Koster is one of our cybersecurity lecturers. He's worked for various telco firms and educative institutions at home and abroad over a 20-odd year career in IT. His subjects are integral to the courses of which they are a part, and I'm very excited to finally be doing a short course with him after a few years of circling around each other. So could you please welcome Jeremy Koster?
Thanks, Guy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the penetration testing short course. I'm really excited to be running this course as well. I hope that we can cover enough ground in this 4 weeks to really give you a good insight into penetration testing, increase your skills, and also, keep it really interesting along the way. This is an exciting thing for me to give, because I've been with and involved in penetration testing for many years through my career in different capacities. So I hope to give you a good rounded view of penetration, what penetration testing is, and how to get going on the path to becoming a penetration tester and really gain some technical skills as well. So here, welcome. My name's Jeremy Koster, as Guy said. I have been around for quite some time in the security sector. It's a small industry in Australia, so chances are if you're in security in Australia, I might have already bumped into you. I look forward to hopefully bumping into some of you in the future. It does happen occasionally. If you do see me at a work meeting or an industry get together, please do come up and say hi. I would love to hear what you thought and actually make contact. So that's one of these things about the digital forum, is that we get to reach so many people, over 1,000 participants in this live session, in this webinar. But we miss that kind of personal face-to-face. So we'll try and supplement that with as much interaction as possible as we go through. I've had a bunch of qualifications. I've actually done an IT master's degree, a Master of Information System Security through Charles Sturt and the IT Masters program, and it was fantastic. And it really helped me in in my career in getting to the next level. So moving from a technician into the management area and further into governance. The webinars will typically go for an hour in content. I am hoping every week to do a little bit of demonstration of what we've discussed in the webinar. Today I'll bring up how to set up your Kali Linux and VirtualBox environment that you will be using in the assessment. We'll talk about the assessment at the end of this webinar. So it's important to get your testing environment set up, and so we'll look forward to doing that. So yeah, an hour, and I am known to go quarter of an hour, half an hour over. We'll see how it goes. We have a bit of content here. These webinars are a little bit different than a standard lecture because there are so many people. We try and cover some content that is requested. So obviously there's a little bit of randomness in these webinars, in these short courses. Please be respectful and helpful. Like Guy said, there are students who come in and really help other students and other participants in this course to find their way, and that is greatly appreciated, and it really helps build the community, and you can actually meet people and get to know them and be and actually form friendships that last for quite a while. It's important that we be respectful in this. Everyone is coming from a different background. Everyone has different knowledge and different specialties in their own field. So it's important not to, if someone asks a question that you think is obvious or you think maybe they shouldn't have asked, to put them down or give them a curt answer. Just try and be helpful. We've all asked the questions because questions seem really silly in hindsight. So once we know the answer, we just really need to be respectful and help those who are just finding their way. Now we have, in this webinar, it might be helpful in the lectures that we run for IT master's degrees in the courses. Those ones will typically run for 13 and 14 weeks. We actually spend a little bit of the time getting to know the class, and that really helps for us to gauge at what level we push the material and how we discuss subjects in the classroom itself. So what we have in this environment is polls. So there's a few questions, and Guy, I might get you to put those polls up.
Yep, beauty. We'll start with question 1. Which continent do you live in? We've got Africa, Europe, Asia, North or South America, and Australia. Overwhelming majority, unsurprisingly, Australia.
How do I see the results for that in poll?
Right. So for those that are listening to the recording, sometimes there's a couple of issues around viewing the polls in the stream. but we've got Africa with 4%, Europe with 4%, Asia with 5%, North America and South America both with 1%, and Australia 86%.
Right.
83% voted. I'll end that one now and share the screen.
So predominantly Australian audience?
Yep, 86%.
Fantastic.
And I'll add to your asking the silly questions spiel. There's no question too silly, so feel free to ask it. As many of you who would have listened to these short courses before would be aware, I am very technically inept. So it's something for everyone. So I'll stop sharing that one, and then we'll go to the next one. How long have you worked in IT? Assuming you have. Under 3 years, 3 to 5 years, 6 to 10 years, 10 to 20 years, or 20 plus. And a nice even spread, probably skewing towards the long-term careers, which is really interesting and certainly, I guess, makes sense given, like, or rings true for all of the people I've been talking to through the short course program. A lot of people who have come to these cyber sort of qualifications and short courses have sort of been in IT for years and years and years, and now cybersecurity's sort of coming through as a really new and interesting and terrifying and exciting sort of field. Again, 85% voted, 15% under 3 years.
Boring.
Hopefully, well, yeah.
When
I
it's too
guess
exciting, there's lots of things going on that you would prefer not to go on.
So we got under 3 years, 16%, 3 to 5, 9%, 6 to 10, 15%, 10 to 20, chip leader, 38%, and 20 plus years, 23%. I'll end that poll and share that screen for a few seconds.
Yeah, wow, okay.
When did you transition into cybersecurity, or were you always sort of one of the...
No, I did general IT. I worked my way up through service desk into desktop support, server support, network support, and then across into cybersecurity. My plan was to get a good introduction of all the different areas of IT before diving into cybersecurity, and that's
cool.
That's paid off a bit. Yeah.
Awesome. And the final poll for today: which industry do you work in? Lots of options here. Terribly sorry if we've missed you. There's another option.
Good on you.
Or fun employment, perhaps. Hopefully, if you're so lucky. IT, of course, being the overwhelming favourite here.
Okay.
We've got IT, construction, education, mining and utilities, hospitality, leisure, entertainment, finance, retail and wholesale, government, healthcare, and others. And yeah, nothing really over 10%. Government, 13%, which is interesting. I wonder whether it's government within IT or IT within government, I should say. Probably, yeah, the only other really notable one. And again, 85% already voted, and we're still above 1,000 attendees. So, geez, this is exciting. So I'll end that poll and share those results. And 50% even in IT, and then a nice even spread across the rest of them.
You're pushing government. Good to see education there.
Should be free, like this one.
Okay.
Editorial. And I'll stop sharing that one. And away we go. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, so that gives us an idea of how the audience is spread, and gives you gives me an idea of the experience in the room. So thank you everyone for that, and for contributing to the polls. I want to talk about the fundamentals of penetration testing from an ethical perspective, right? So what we're doing here, and I think it makes some people a little bit nervous. People who are responsible for protecting systems and for keeping systems secure, that we might be actually teaching people how to break into systems. But this is not the course that you attend if you want to be a criminal, or if you want to gain from your own personal gain at someone else's expense. It's important to remember that we have to take an ethical perspective with everything we do in cybersecurity, and penetration testing is no different. And it's actually provides, this sort of knowledge can actually be quite dangerous. So we have to be very clear about what we have permission to do. So If you are in your own organization and you don't have permission to scan or interact or even exploit vulnerabilities in your environment, then you shouldn't be doing it. You must get an authoritative person to be able to say, or someone in the right level of the organization who you are confident that they have the authority to give you permission. You must get their permission before you try anything. Because even just scanning, and I've got multiple examples of this, even just scanning a network, if it hasn't been scanned before, can cause things to go down. It used to be that just an Nmap scan around the network would drop off all the jet direct printers. But now we even have, things like Nessus or Qualys or a very capable vulnerability scanner will poke at everything on the network, and it will poke it in all sorts of ways. And we just don't know what it will do. So you really need permission. And I would suggest that you should try your activities in a time of the business where they can have some outage. So maybe out of hours, and only do a select group first. Don't hit everything. Because the worst thing we can do is start to do these activities, and maybe your organization needs some probing, some vulnerability scanning to find out where the weaknesses are. They may need that desperately. But if you drive into the shop like a bull in a china shop, then you may actually turn them off any kind of security testing. So it's really important to get permission from that angle, as well as from the angle, if you do something, they can actually take you to court. If you haven't had permission, if you've gained unauthorized access to systems that your company didn't want you to have, then they might actually bring the law to bear against you, which nobody wants. So make sure you get permission. It is not okay to say, I was doing it because of research. This is not a valid excuse or reason. The law still stands, and you should not be breaking into anyone's system without permission, without the appropriate and right level of permission. To say it will benefit the owner. Now, I've seen this a lot in the industry, and this is a bit of a gray area. If you have systems exposed, websites and things like that, and someone scans them and finds something wrong, then they might try and let the security person of that organization know. There's nothing really wrong with that to a point where you haven't really attempted to gain unauthorized access. Doing a vulnerability scanning on somebody else's website can be constituted as an attempt to gain access, so just be very careful. But just saying I did it because it will benefit the owner isn't good enough. You'll end up on the wrong side. I've had, throughout my years, different sales guys coming up to me at times saying, you have a vulnerability, come and meet with me and I'll tell you all about it. And all they're wanting to do is get in front of you and sell you something. And it's a tactic to kind of get you going. And I always say, well, give me the, that old saying, pics or it didn't happen. Give me the evidence or I won't actually follow this up or continue the engagement with you at all. And give me the evidence before we meet, before we even decide to meet. Anyway, so that happens there. There is also this issue sometimes when you're doing a penetration test or a vulnerability scan, and you might actually accidentally include someone else's system. There's issues where you might have like an iframe that is pointing off to somebody else's website, or you might have hosting. You might be hosting something for a customer, and that customer wants to scan, and they end up scanning your entire systems that are hosting other customers' things. So it can happen. So it's important to be also sympathetic to that consideration, but also make sure if you're the penetration tester, you get the scope worked out very clearly, and we'll be discussing that a bit later on. But it's not okay to say, I'm going to break into this system because it will benefit the owner to find out. That's not okay. You still need the permission. So internal team or external consultancy, usually you've got to be big enough and funded enough to really get an internal team built in your organization that is of good enough capability to do good penetration testing. You need to be quite big in the finance area, maybe in telco, When you're an external consultancy, you actually obviously doing penetration testing all the time, and you manage to hone your skills. So where do you want to be? What do you want to do? I've always worked as an internal team, and I found that very fruitful. I've not worked as an external consultancy. I've considered it a few times. I've worked as a penetration testing consultant for inside business units. So that's worked for me. But really think about that. It's different. It's different to the point where internal you have a lot more information at your disposal, but the external consultancy can really focus on the skills. And they also have to be a lot more considerate about the customer and a lot more professional. And that's not to say internal teams aren't professional, but external consultancies need to live and breathe professionalism, or else they probably won't get ongoing business. Now, this comes up to something very important. It's the sympathy for the customer. The amount of times I've been in a talk and someone said, oh, this stupid customer did this, or this person, the numbskull, they left this open. Systems are insecure and become more insecure over time because of many, many reasons. And it just may be oversight. It just may be a mistake. It just may be not knowing. And if we all were, made fun of just because we didn't know something, we would have been made fun of a lot. So it's really important to have sympathy for the customer. If that sympathy doesn't come across in your customer engagements, or there is some sort of exposure of an internal conversation that ridicules a customer, then it's over with. But more than that, we have to be sympathetic, have a sympathetic approach to the customer, a genuinely sympathetic approach to the customer, because lots of organizations don't have the skills or the resources to have this kind of thing done, have a penetration test done, have permanent security staff, all that kind of thing. They just don't know. They're trying to do their business. They're experts in their business, and they don't want to really have to worry about the security side of things. So really have sympathy for the customer. It's really important. And it's important to have respect for peers. And we've talked about that for this webinar, but also in the industry. There's no place in my mind for the arrogance that sometimes comes across in cybersecurity. We're all in the position we're in because of our background and how we've come there, and we should respect that. I had a really interesting point raised to me. I do some training with undergrads as well as for professional people, and I often get this idea that, why would you teach people to break into stuff? Aren't you you're just creating more fires that you can put out, creating work for yourself? But that's not the case. What we're trying to create are firefighters that know how fires start and grow, so that we can quench the fires and get into a safe situation. It's not about causing carnage. We're not saying people, here, this is how you break into something, go and destroy. It's actually, this is how the fires start. Please go and do things that have a mutual benefit for you and your customer or your internal company. It's important to have a positive influence as a penetration tester. And we really, if you look at how penetration testing works, it's not just the technical side. We are supposed to be and should be a bridge between the cybersecurity issues and the business. When the business grows up, it goes from small to big, and they're being successful, they're good at what they do, but they don't always have time to spend on the IT and the security. So we must be that bridge between cyber and the business. And I'll talk a bit about that in a risk assessment slide that I've got later. And finally, before we move on to a bit more, but based on theory and ethics, it's an issue of trust. There is no one who is going to have or allow you to test their systems if they don't trust you. If they are considering that you might break into their systems and take your data and expose it somehow, there's no way they're even going to touch you. So it is, all of this helps you build that profile of trust and allows you to do what you can do as a technical expert to show them where they can fix and getting that mutual benefit. And this is the same with cybersecurity, not penetration testing, cybersecurity management as well. In cybersecurity consulting and auditing, also cybersecurity strategy. It's about, and it's a bit cliche, but it's about hearts and minds in the organization. If you have people's trust in the organization, then they are going to come to you. If you abuse that trust and are heavy-handed and just escalate every time someone's tries to defend their position, then people start to bypass you and you've lost it. So it's important to have that trust all the way through, especially as a penetration tester, internal or as an external consultant. Why does penetration testing exist? What? We want people to hack our systems? Are you crazy? Like, this is, why did anyone think of this? And it's quite obvious that we don't really know if a system's secure until we test it. And we don't know even then if it's perfectly secure. But we can certainly have a good go of testing all the obvious stuff so that it's a little bit harder to break into than it used to be. And over time, as you do that, you increase the security posture of that system or that environment. So what have we got? We have a threat landscape. We have an environment in the industry and on the internet that is absolutely combative. It is a very adversarial environment. You put anything on the internet that is vulnerable, that is obviously vulnerable with a vulnerability that's a couple of years old, then it's not very long until it actually gets compromised. You put a Linux box on the internet and you put TCP dump on it and watch all the traffic go past, and things will be probing it all the time, and it will be actively attacked. There are many adversaries out there, and obviously all of them are wearing a hoodie and sitting on a construction wall. And they're all around the world. I mean, it is really easy to do if you're in that business to automate all these attacks and just be pinged when it's successful and then make use of it then. So often there's a low cost for all these attacks that are going on. And obviously we have malware bouncing around. We still have WannaCry bouncing around. We still have Configure bouncing around. We still even have Spybot and Crunchy bouncing around as well. These are very old viruses that are still infecting systems that are vulnerable. You put a Windows 95, ooh, yeah, put a Windows XP box that is, not, Service Pack 1 on the internet, and it will be owned pretty quickly. So we have this malware that bounces around everywhere. We have an internet environment now that has passwords for many, many people and many, many accounts, billions of accounts that are in the wild. And they're still being cracked. So there's hashed passwords that are out there that the criminals are still cracking to find legitimate accounts that are a couple of years old and then breaking into them. They still exist. They have a plethora of accounts to just try and try and try. And if your organization's on Office 365, they'll just be trying every account that they have access to that has come from data dumps. So this is just emerged over the last couple of years, but has become a major issue for compromised accounts, and passwords have become really important, and we're trying to find, as an industry, better ways of doing that. We have vulnerabilities, and no system comes out with all of the vulnerabilities known yet. So you release a 1.0 version of an application, and then over time, we discover the vulnerabilities in the application. So these vulnerabilities are sitting in there dormant until we discover them and someone plans to exploit them. So let's think about the WannaCry stuff, the MS, I think it's the MS-17 010. So that vulnerability allowed whoever knew about it to just access a Windows machine as system administrator without any authentication, right? So they could just walk into it. And obviously if they have network connection to it, and it created malware that could just spread everywhere. But this vulnerability, while discovered in 17, was actually existed for years and was used by the NSA and obviously other hackers during this time. So it just sat there dormant without anyone knowing how to patch it. So that clearly is happening now in a lot of our systems. So we need to patch things as we identify the vulnerability. And that's a large part of penetration testing, is identifying those vulnerabilities and which ones are severe and which ones are not. Which ones require immediate actions and which one can wait. And that's important because that has a business context. And then we think about pivoting. So the big thing now is once you get access to a system, you then want to pivot around. I mean, it's been the big thing for a long time, but you actually want to pivot around the network. And this is how a lot of the major attacks occur, is that it is a matter of pivoting from one system to the next. So you have to have security in layers, defense in depth, we call it, so that you can protect against that. And really, it's not going to go away because there is a tension between product launch and security. We are in an industry that, I mean, the global economy relies on the release of products, and organizations rely on profit. So they rely on getting a product out before their competitor. So they get that competitive advantage and can gain obviously more revenue before other competing companies. So we have this drive to deliver products, and a lot of product has software. And this is really the big point about IoT, is that this software is pushed out there so quickly that they haven't had the time to fix or consider about the security. So there's this tension between pushing product and securing the product, because any kind of review or any kind of backtracking or quality checking actually slows down the delivery. And that's the really big issue. So what we have is an industry that is going to continue going on that way. So the point there is, if you're in cybersecurity and you're a pen tester and good at your job, then you are likely to have jobs for life. I shouldn't laugh about it, because there's a lot of stress, and there's a lot of personal disruption and personal loss when these things go pear-shaped. When there is a big breach, or there is actually a personal impact, which is important to remember. And security degrades over time. I had to have that point about vulnerabilities lying dormant, and as you leave a machine on its own and don't maintain it, then over time it will naturally degrade. And not because it is falling to pieces, just because we identify those vulnerabilities as the technology ages. All right, so when you're in a penetration testing engagement, you need to think about scope. So what are you pointing your tools at? What are you trying to get out of your penetration test? Now, it's quite controversial, because a lot of companies may say, well, we want to get an annual pen test done, but only do it on this, and this system. And they might choose 3 of their systems they know are pretty mature, and so they can get a nice clean bill of health and move on. It's important at a high level and at a principle level to get a good scope. If you are positioning a penetration test as an external penetration test of all our external systems, that it should be a good sample, well, not just a sample, but a good spread across the systems that constitute your external perimeter. Okay, so that's important to do. Now, there's common terminology in the industry. A white box penetration test is all about knowing the environment before you actually try and pen test it. A lot of internal pen testers live with internal knowledge and use internal knowledge while they pen test, which I think is fair enough, but it gives them an added advantage. I think it's important sometimes to think about it from a black box perspective as well. So someone who's coming from the other side of the world and doesn't know the environment at all, to try and break into the pen test, to break into the environment. So it's important to look at it from that perspective as well, because you may go to the natural weaknesses you know about without thinking of what's actually exposed to those who are the bigger threat. And then the grey box is a mix of that, some of it, you don't know all of it, but you try and break in with that knowledge. And you might provide the pen tester with some of that knowledge as well, so that they can speed up their engagement and cost you less money. Internal, external pen test. This is an external pen test will test you against people who are, attacking your perimeter. The internal penetration test will look at really how your network looks from a trusted perspective. So how do your staff who sit in a desk see your internal environment? That may also bleed into DMZs and other data center networks or zone networks. But really the idea is, I think mostly with internal networks, is to think about a pivot from those desktops and laptops that your staff sit in. So the end user networks and have a perspective there. Are we doing a network pen test? So are we talking about getting through network devices and equipment, getting, root on those things, or finding other routes into the network that people didn't know about previously? Are we doing an OS pen test? Are we doing application or database? Usually a pen test will include all of these things if it's comprehensive. We're also talking about social engineering with penetration testing. Are you permitted to email someone and pretend to be someone else? I've seen a lot of these things done, and I think sometimes they are too high quality. So you might have someone who knows the internal kind of layout, the internal language, and then they might mimic an email from an internal support person. That is maybe more than what someone would do. Obviously, an advanced attacker would do that, but obviously I wouldn't go straight to that. I think social engineering, yeah, do a couple of phishing emails, see if they respond, maybe do a friendly phishing campaign, try getting in physically with social engineering, or try over the phone. Social engineering done well is lethal. As we know that a lot of cybersecurity is not just a technical problem, but a people problem, because people and the interface with computers, people generally trust people through computers, which is, something that is a bit surprising sometimes. Is it a wireless penetration test? Can we do evil twin? Can we break the encryption? Guest networks open to sniffing? Have we got smartphone apps that you need a review done on the code, and also a review done on the API that the smartphone might plug into, and maybe even looking at the artifacts in the smartphone app itself. How does it handle encryption keys? Is the API, manipulatable to get more? Can you manipulate the API to get more information than you should? Also, then physical access. This is kind of going away a bit. I mean, you might do a physical access into an office. Less so into the data center these days, because most of our stuff's in the cloud and we often don't know where the data center is. And I think if a pen test team turned up to the AWS data center, if they found out where it was, they might get turned away pretty quickly. But yeah, it's still a valid pen test to do, because you might actually find some vulnerabilities that need to be fixed up. Like, there should be a security guard there. Someone just let me in. Open source intelligence. So this is a term that's commonly used to find out all of the information about an organization and its infrastructure just from using search engines and databases on the internet. There's an enormous amount of historical data. You can dive into this and never come out of it. So it's important to get your value and then move on. But really, we're talking about Google Docs. We're talking about using Bing. Bing's got some surprising cool features. RobText as well, things like that to do reverse DNS, reverse IP lookup. So which domains are sitting on this IP address, things like that. There is a wealth of information there. Obviously, whois and DNS information is really important as well. So doing all that in Google before actually even touching it can be very enlightening for an organization. So we'll touch on those things. Frameworks and guidelines. So this is a bit of a boring part of penetration testing. Who wants to break into stuff and then have to put a structure around it? But they can actually be really helpful. The pen test execution standard is good and very comprehensive. It's got really good guidelines into reporting as well. PCI DSS has a good guide on what should be done during a pen test. They all kind of follow the same stream. They're all intended to pull together a body of knowledge and to allow a pen tester to do a more thorough job. It can really help. The OWASP testing guide, it looks like an enormous checklist, and that can help you really be more thorough in your pen test and figure out if you're actually testing a web application properly or not. The one put out by the United States government, the NIST SP 800-2115, is good as well. I find them less approachable than maybe the PTS and the PCI DSS. And then obviously there's the mobile security testing guide as well from OWASP. These are all good. There's more out there than this, obviously, but these are good examples of guidelines and standards that you can use to mature and be more professional about your penetration test. It's not important to absolutely use one of these, and some companies might use these instead of others. I generally go by the GIAC GPen standard, not standard, their course. That was my kind of introduction to penetration testing back in the day, and that's really a good course for the methodology. If you can get a methodology that works for you and you understand it, that's really the important part here. But it's good to know these exist so that you can, align yourself with one of them, and it helps add weight, because you can put in your report, we did a pen test on this system in accordance with this framework or this guide, and it can add weight to the penetration test. Guy, I realize I'm going on where a good way into it. Is there any Q&A that are worthwhile?
Well, there's heaps. There's 1,000 people. Unprecedented in my time at the IT Master. So I reckon we just push on through and have a bit of a Q&A session at the end of it after your, or during your add-on bit, because it's just going nuts. Yeah, no problems. That's fine. I'll persist. All right, the lab and testing environment is crucial. So I've got a line down there that knowing what is and is not working is half the battle. You can spend hours on a particular tool trying to get something to work and it just not work. And you don't know why it's not working, because penetration testing tools aren't always and are actually rarely written with quality assurance and with good error reporting. So you may be sitting there in front of a screen hitting that same command and it coming back and doing nothing. So when you've actually used the tool before against a practice system that you have permission to test on, then you really have a good bet. Well, you have a better understanding of what you're expecting to see back, and if you should try something else or not. And so don't dive into a pen test if you've not used a tool before successfully. That's really important. So knowing what is and is not working is really, really important for the pen tester. So the top line there, back up to the practice, practice, practice. There's no shortcuts. I think a lot of the pen testers in the industry and any professional pen testers that are actually on this course will actually agree that it takes a lot of work to build your skill around pen testing, and a lot of note taking, a lot of documentation, and there's not a great deal of shortcuts you can take. You can be efficient in your training, and that's important. You can, and we'll talk about how we can do that. So that's not so much a shortcut as in making sure you're not wasting time, but you must practice, 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 practice. If you are intending to take this career path to become a professional pen tester, whether for an organization internally or for a consultancy, then you must get the hours under your belt. There's just no other way. You can't just read a book and become a pen tester. You must practice. So Kali Linux, built on Debian or Ubuntu, I think maybe Debian. Easy to install. It's got the tool installation already, works well in a VM. I use VirtualBox. I never really
was okay with VMware. I'm not sure why. I think I tried it early on in my career when it was, you know, they both work well, but I just think VirtualBox has less limitations. And, you know, before it even was taken over by Oracle, it was a very good virtual machine for me and works well. So Kali works well in a VM. Obviously, there are limitations in terms of CPU and making sure that you don't get the full bare metal power. So the VM won't also let you do wireless pen test elegantly. So if you're doing wireless testing, then you usually need USB, direct USB access and have bare metal install. But for the majority of stuff, we can use a VM, but you obviously need a fair bit of RAM. You need a good CPU. I think I've got 16 gigs on my Mac that I use for my Kali VM, as well as other kind of target VMs that I have on there. And really being able to create your own environment without having to pull hardware from out of cupboards or use old laptops is crucial. So you've got to be a master of your own training, and that you can really only do that if you have your own VM environment and you get it talking to each other, get it talking to the internet, you know how to update it, and that's really where you launch off into becoming into trying the pen testing tools. There's also Black Arc. I have not used Black Arc. I've just been a Kali Linux guy. It's getting quite a big following, so I encourage you to check it out as well. The demonstrations that I'll be doing in the following weeks will be around Kali Linux, but really all I'm doing is using the tools that are in Kali Linux. The same tools will be in Black Arc as well. There may be different versions, but mostly be the same. I find Kali fairly easy to use, easy to install. And there was always a pain trying to get the VM, the virtual machine guest utilities and guest tools installed in Kali. But if you follow the steps on the Kali Linux page, which I'll show at the end of this session, and also in the discussion forums, I'll post those links. Then if you just follow the steps and get the right kernel modules and update correctly, then it works fine. There is also VirtualBox OVAs built for Kali. I've not used those, but apparently those VirtualBox add-ons are working already. So the guest add-ons are working already in that. So I encourage you to have a look at that. Again, I'll post those links so you can download them and get that ready. You will need a working virtual environment, and the virtual environment that we'll be using for the assessment. So you'll be downloading a virtual machine, and we'll talk more about this at the end, and hopefully there'll be some Q&A, but you'll be downloading a virtual machine that you are to attack with your Kali Linux or your Black Arc, and we'll then find out answers for the exam from that. So it's important that you get this testing environment together, not just for your own learning, but also for this course. And it's how, the pen testers I know about are all over this stuff. This is how they kind of cut their teeth and get things going and find out about, there's kind of levels to penetration testing. This allows a pen tester to find out all the vulnerabilities that are available to them that are within reach. There's other levels then that go into security researching and finding out your own vulnerabilities. And that's at a whole different level, but encourage you to work through it. Then there's this concept of NAT or bridge. I typically have liked bridge because it means you get so the difference between virtual machines having behind a NAT is almost like being behind your router at home. You're on a safe network that is not exposed to other computers. So you're behind your host IP address. So your guest is sitting behind your host IP address, and the host IP is natted. So the guest traffic is natted through the host IP address. So you can sit behind that in your own VM kind of little cocoon and be protected there, or you can bridge and actually ask the network or the DHCP server that you're your host is on for an IP address that you can sit alongside. And you effectively, your host has two IP addresses. One of them goes to the VM, and obviously the host one stays with it. You can do that, you know, up to, I don't know, 16, 17, I don't know, so many IP addresses. I've not found a limit. I've hosted capture the flag events like that in that configuration in Bridge, and that works well because you can reach the vulnerable machines over, or the virtual machines over the network. So just think about that. For the exam, we'll be talking about, or the assessment, we'll be talking about accessing the VM in a NAT situation. Because it is a vulnerable system, and you're all, and I'm guessing the majority of you are learning these sorts of things, then we will keep it in an isolated environment where the Kali Linux can talk to, or the attack machine can talk to the vulnerable machine in its own network. So think about NAT or Bridge. Sometimes Bridge is easier, particularly if you have to tunnel with a funny tunneling like, I don't know, GRE, PPTP, that sort of thing. Validate your tool operation. This is back to my point about knowing what is and is not working. So this is how you do it. You get vulnerable machines and you try it out, and that's how you validate how your tool works, what syntax is there. And you've got to make sure you make notes. If you are trying to learn, then you want to be able to, you don't want to be thinking, oh, I've done this before. What was the switch I used for this tool? Why is TCP dump not giving me the information I need? Why is Nmap not scanning that way? And obviously Google's your friend, but if you've done it once and you've got a working formula, make sure you keep track of it. All right, so when you're at a pen testing engagement, there are rules, and this goes back about keeping trust with the customer, whether it be an internal or an external engagement. You want to be talking about what testing windows would you like us to use, and this is not, you know, panes of glass. I'm talking about hours of operation. I've been in organisations where we had a 4-hour testing window between midnight and 4 a.m. Man, and trying to get a good amount of pen testing done in those times actually made it stretch over a couple of weeks. It was really interesting. It made us really tired, but it was really interesting because you got to do a lot of research around your pen testing activities. So you would set up, you know, first you'd find vulnerabilities, and then you'd set up your exploits and be able to test them. And then when it came time to do your pen testing, you had it all ready to go, which was interesting. But you need to be, the organization needs to be comfortable with when you're testing. Some organizations are less concerned about availability than others and will say, yeah, go through the whole business hours. Some will require an outage window on a weekend, Sunday from, you know, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. or something like that. They'll give you a time frame, but it's important to get that worked out with the people that are responsible for the uptime of the organization's systems. Make sure you get that written authorization. An email is probably good enough for internal, as long as you don't hack and delete your own email and lose that. It's important, obviously, to get permission. Make sure you get contact names. So you may be doing it on your own. The people who are monitoring systems should know that a pen test is going on. There's you know, some notion that you shouldn't tell anyone a pen test is happening so that people can't react and fix things. I'm not sure I entirely agree with that, but you know, I think that's fairly rare. But people should know who to call if there's something funny going on. So if you're pen testing happily away on server 1 and server 3 just suddenly dies, and they all go, ah, it's pen testing, they broke it. They need to be able to contact you and dispel that rumor, because they need to be able to trust you. And if there's some other problem, they need to go fix that. So yeah, you can say, well, I was only, you know, dealing with server 3. Server 1, and I'm not sure what was happening with server 3. Then they can go and fix that. So people shouldn't be able to contact each other very quickly if there's an issue. When to reach for the bat phone. So pen testing gets very serious when you find a gaping hole. right? So if you're pen testing a perimeter for an organization, and you find maybe a Windows box that is vulnerable to, all sorts of things, and you can get shell, and then you can move on and download, you can use Mimikatz to get all the passwords, and then you can use that to pivot. At some point, you've got to sort of say, hey, this is massive. They need to fix this because it's too urgent for us to keep going. Maybe it's a website that's got SQL injection that just dumps the entire customer database. If that happens, you stop it straight away and you reach for the bat phone. And the best thing to do is actually to have a conversation about that with the customer, to say, at what point should we call you and fix up? And I often say, look, if you find something that's exploitable right now and puts our systems at risk, please call me at any time so we can go and fix it straight away. And I've had that happen. I've had the call and I knew it was a pen test. I'm like, oh no, what have they found? And we've had to run around and fix something. And it's better that happens than you let it go on. Obviously, there may be a pivot, and a pivot. I'm behind that. But if there's something that is a clear and present risk, you should really be picking up the bat phone. Scope. So, you want IP address ranges, you want DNS names, you want applications and databases that you need to pen test. You don't want to go outside of that. You want to make sure the scope actually includes infrastructure that is owned and managed by the organization. If they give you, if it's kind of, I don't want to use a real example, but if it's Susan's hairdresser saying, yes, can you please attack Marsha's hairdressers, then or pen test their network and let us know what the vulnerabilities are, that'd be great. So obviously that's an absurd situation, but often there is overflow or a miscommunication of DNS names. So acme.net instead of acme.com could be completely different organizations. Make sure you understand what your scope is and stick to it. And destructive testing is very controversial. So typically destructive testing is left out because no one really wants it. Obviously, we're mostly talking about DDoS. Is there UDP amplification big enough to take down our link? Or is there like a slow loris attack on a web application that can actually grind the application to a halt? Those sorts of things you will find about them anyway if they exist mostly. So you obviously want to fix them, but generally you don't want pen testers to find them. Mostly we're talking about protecting confidentiality and integrity with pen testing rather than finding the availability impacting vulnerabilities. And obviously if you're scanning and the system goes down, then then after 5 minutes it comes back again, then you scan and it goes down again. You might want to call someone and say, hey, I think I might be triggering something that is breaking a system. Shall we talk about it? And I'll stop doing that and we can fix it. We can find out what the issue is. And you can pinpoint what traffic is actually causing that. So generally destructive testing stays out because you don't want, hooray, volumetric just brings down the site or the links. Some sort of, you might be able to find and say, if there's an SQL injection, there's a possibility you can tie up all sorts of SQL queries that are expensive and will bring the site down. So, we need to fix that up. That's a possibility, but actually going through and bringing a system down, typically not done in a pen test. Hours and cost, if you're doing this, even some internal engagements require you to have an hours and cost against it. How many resources you're using. It's good to do. It's good to try and get that as part of the scope so there's an end time to it. Pen testing is one of those things that you can just dive and keep going and going and going, especially if you've got bespoke web applications that you are trying all sorts of things on and getting into the nitty gritty, all that sort of thing. It's important to have a time frame around these things. In saying that, this is one of the biggest problems with pen testing is that it requires some sort of scoping and resource, and usually it requires a quote from a pen testing consultancy saying this is how many hours we'll spend. and it has to be enough hours to get good value out of it. And that's a tricky thing to get right. External consultancy documents. So if you're an external consultant, you need to have a whole lot more preparation with documentation than you normally would. You need a quote, you need a statement of work, you need to make it very clear upfront what you're going to do. If you end up providing a report and you didn't include anything in the report that you were supposed to in the SOW, then they might come back to you and say, hey, the SOW had this method, we see none of that in the report. How does this work? So you've got to be clear with your quote and SOW to make sure that everyone is comfortable with it. You might have a master service agreement which kind of governs how you have those rules of engagement for this and future work, or maybe just a single contract for an engagement. But whatever it is, there needs to be something protecting both entities from litigation after the fact if something goes wrong. So make sure that that is quite, and I think a lot of pen testing firms have this all sorted out and have it as part of their agreement to make it, smooth it over. They have their standard one, and the organisation has to sign it. Obviously, written authorization, I don't know how many times I need to say it, probably not anymore, but we must have permission. We must have permission, or else we'll end up in hot water. We must have permission that we can point at and say, there, that's the permission. And also there might be a non-disclosure agreement. This comes to calling on the bat phone as well. So if you get to a point in your pen test where you can actually see rows of data that looks like it might be really sensitive, it's important to stop there and to clean up your environment. So what you might have done is actually downloaded files to your attack machine that is not really built to be as secure as the systems you're pen testing. Obviously, there's a vulnerability and you've exploited it and pulled down that data, so it's not super secure, but that means that you need to get rid of the data that you've just downloaded if it is super sensitive, because you don't want to then go to another engagement or share your VM with someone, or someone else get into your data, or accumulate customer data over time and then lose your laptop or something like that and have all that data out there. So we must keep the hygiene of the attack systems. It's important to do from engagement to engagement. Oh yeah, and the non-disclosure is all about those organizations that if you do have something, that you found something, you just don't go and post it on a forum and say, hey, I found company XYZ has this vulnerability, go check it out. You can download all of the credit card numbers that they've taken payments with for the last 2 years. You obviously don't want to do that. You don't want to tell anyone, and you may be under a binding agreement for a period of time to give them an ability to, or give them time to fix it up. All right, we're getting close to the end of this session. This slide's about the business context to penetration testing. Obviously, anything we do has to have a risk structure around it, right? So when you're purely technical and you're not thinking about the business, it looks a pen test looks very different to if you are thinking about it in business context. If you are able to break into a dev machine, get a whole lot of code, that's maybe not very sensitive, get into the operating system, get the root password and stuff like that, that may be a massive achievement from a penetration testing perspective, but it may be not very consequential to the business. If that dev environment's got nothing of value on it and is just, maybe it's out of use and not really a problem to the business, then they may not care that much. But if you manage to get into a production system and you can probe systems behind the production system, somehow get some redirected pings going on, or some fragmentation, so you can actually see some of the infrastructure behind the key system, then that may be really important to the business. That may be stuff that they don't want anyone to be able to touch. And if you're able to touch it, that's the crown jewels. Whether or not you can read it or not, but actually manipulate it could be a really big problem. So actually sitting down with the business and understanding what their key assets are, understanding who their customers are, what information they capture and store and use, and what sort of value it has to them is really important to understand the risk elements of the penetration test. If you just say, right, I found this 10 or 100 vulnerabilities in these systems without any of that business context, then they have to trawl through and draw a line between you and the business context. And really what we're looking at is likelihood and impact. We always think from a technical perspective, we always think about impact, but we have to also think about likelihood. How likely is it that it's going to happen? And also what asset is it going to impact? Not just what kind of a damage can you do to the system, but what impact would that have on the business? So the way we look at this is we think about threat scenarios. The threat scenarios are a massive concept for me through my career to try and push through to the business. And it's a method for explaining a threat to the business in their words. So it has three, and I usually have a couple of slides on this, but in cybersecurity management and in incident response and things like that. But really, we'll cover this quickly. It has three main factors. You have an actor, an asset, and a negative impact, right? So you might have a malicious external attacker gains unauthorized access to the customer database, right? That simple sentence will send chills down the business leaders in a business context, right? You haven't said, in system ABC, I was able to exploit the Apache module for SSL and be able to get root access onto the box and then do a reverse shell to another system and get access. You're not just saying that. You're actually saying, right, this is what can happen. A malicious actor can get unauthorized access to your company database. That is all it needs to be. Not every threat fits into a nice, simple context like that, but giving that business context to them really helps them understand it. And then you are able to gauge what that risk appetite is as well. So as you explain these things to them, you say, this is what can happen, then you'll see by the color of their face and maybe their response, what the risk appetite is for the business. They may, for all of your risks say, no, that's all right, we'll fix that later, And they have a very robust appetite for risk. But maybe they don't have an appetite for risk at all and want to clear up everything, and it's a call to action and they fix it. And you actually save them from a big future. You'll never know that, but it's possible that that's the case. And obviously we never, and this is hard to do, and you can't be completely clear of this, but you try never to overstate risk. So what my tactic here is that when you find something that is significant and when you find something that you think they would be interested in, you have to sit on it for a little while. Try and think of it in the business context. Obviously, if it's burning, houses on fire style thing, then you've got to pick up the bat phone. But just sit on something for a little while, explain it to a colleague, write it out, just do some sanity checking before you state risk about a particular issue. And that's really understanding the risk appetite. You don't want to be the sky is falling or the boy who cried wolf. All right, so readings and homework for next week. What I want you all to do for the upcoming sessions is make sure you get VirtualBox going, download Kali Linux, download the Kali VM, get the guest editions working, get your NAT network working, and we'll do some of this in a little bit. For those who want to hang around, test out some of the tools, and only on your own machines. Make sure you try Nmap, Nikto, Derb, Metasploit, Hashcat. Try some of those things, some of the ones that are some of the major tools out there. Try some tools that are even less major, some kind of side tools, maybe the Hacker's Choice Hydra or something like that. Try a few things. And then do the weekly quiz as well. So make sure you get all that done. But that is the official end of this webinar. Stick around for a little bit. I'll answer Q&A, and I'll also just go through some of the setup of a VirtualBox with a NAT network for those who want to see that. So hang on, let's see.
Let's find out. Thank you, Jeremy. Heavens above. And thanks everyone for hanging around. There's about 460,000 questions, of which I will ask maybe 5 or so of the best, or at least those that I most understand, and no doubt will make very clear to all the extent of my technical ineptitude. But let's just go for a cross-section of them. David has asked, it seems the bad guys, including state-based actors, are in advance of threat defenses. How do we protect our systems from these threats if constant pen testing is no more effective than lock-keeping, keeping honest people out?
That's a good question. And I think it's about protecting what you can protect. You'll see, not everyone is a target of very highly motivated and well-funded threat actors, such as state actors, but it does occur. But most of these breaches that occur, often you fix them with the basics like passwords, patching, and antivirus. So I would say try and protect yourself from the low-hanging fruit being broken into and exploited at first, and then work your way up the sophistication from there. Because if you're not doing the obvious stuff, then they'll use that first, and you've got to give them a little bit more of a challenge. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is that there is no such thing as a completely secure network, right? We all know that. There's no perfect security. There is always holes to some degree, and you are in a constant process of finding those. And with the right skills and the right techniques and the right monitoring and alerting, then you can have a much better chance of identifying those threat actors in time before they actually do any damage. It is true that it seems hopeless sometimes because some of the best protected organizations get popped and get broken into, but also look at the Equifaxes and the Targets, Target Corps, and those kinds of breaches where they were vulnerable systems that could have been patched, or they were passwords that could have been changed. So my advice is to look for those obvious things first and then work your way up in the sophistication.
Thank you. There's quite a few questions about, I guess, the impact of innovation in technology and the effect it has, number one, on, I guess, the career prospects, but also, the industry itself, and what happens with pen testing. Sort of what are the impact of quantum computing, or what would the impact of quantum computing or AI or machine learning be on pen testing in the future?
Yeah, I guess we're yet to see. There's a lot of promise. There is, so I'm talking about AI and machine learning. There's a lot of promise to actually automate a lot of this stuff. But from what I know is that the good pen testers are those who really have a good feel for where a system will be vulnerable and will be able to break into it. And that involves a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge, and it is difficult for that to be replicated in AI. There are automated systems that do a lot of this work for you. I mean, you can Metasploit you to your heart's content and find vulnerable systems and break into them, and automate a lot of that. But from my experience, there is still a need for that human deduction. And I think where we'll come to is pen testing, where you use AI as a tool, another tool to do your pen testing in your arsenal of tools that you might have already. In terms of quantum computing, oh man, that's a massive topic. So quantum computing, the threat there is obviously you'll be able to break encryption like RSA and elliptic curve. encryption because of the way they can, do prime number factoring and things like that. But thanks to a recent talk I sat in with Bruce Schneier, that is still a little way off. Kudos to Bruce Schneier for being one of the smartest people on the planet and explaining this in simple terms. But still, it's a fair way off. There are kind of hopes that quantum key distribution will allow us to encrypt stuff that cannot be broken by quantum computers. But there is also a drive for post-quantum cryptography encryption as well. So, and the principle there is that there is quite a few encryption algorithms, and I urge those who are thinking about that to there's these encryption routines that were discarded in the early days that were actually more resistant to quantum computing decryption. So they are going back to the drawing board with a lot of these encryption algorithms and coming up with an encryption suite that is quantum computer resistant. So it's not all dire, it's still coming. What we have to be aware of is if we want encryption to be valuable for and effective for 10 years, then maybe we need to do strong encryption now, but as well as quantum resistant encryption now as well, and you double encrypt or something similar. And that is for very, serious cases. But otherwise, it's not something we really have to worry about. We look at encryption now lasting for 5 years. I think quantum computing is one of those things we don't quite have the qubits to do the damage now, but as explained to me once, the discoveries goes in leaps and bounds. So you may have no real advancement for a little while, and then a quick advancement, and then much like evolution's been described for a long time. Yeah, hope that helps.
Me too. No idea what you just said. Any recommendations for pen testing for systems that are process oriented? For example, an industrial system
right,
be tested, but also can't go down, or you can't stop the process.
Yeah, that's tricky, isn't it? So
that one was from Andrew. So thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, I think you've got to find time and take it little by little. So you've got to find time when there is the least impact of disruption, and then take very baby steps. So be very incremental about your testing. But again, a lot of these systems are accessed through the management systems that surround them. So I would start with those as well, the perimeter systems. Look at how the networks are configured and architected to allow external remote access. And I would look at how those channels work before actually diving into the center of the control system, the operation system, the operational technology. So, and I would also multi-factor authentication the heck out of it. So I would put a ring around it and put as much MFA and really sophisticated kind of hardware-based MFA around that stuff to protect it. And then I would pen test it based on those channels that come in and take a very incremental approach. I hope that helps.
Okay. Any recommendations for good books on Kali Linux? Also for pen testing in general from Mark.
Yes. I think it's probably best to put some links up. I would recommend studying in the line of kind of preparing for the OSCP or similar, or CREST exam or something like that. If you're actually serious about becoming a penetration tester, that's a good line to take to get some certification, to get it under your belt. So I will suggest a few books in the discussion forum later on. They all have similar titles. I was going to say, yeah, Exploiting Networks or Pen Testing Networks is a good book, but they all have similar titles, and it's probably best to give some links.
Beauty, we'll put those in there soon. And I guess the final question will go for actually is mostly around, I think, what you'll be displaying soon. A lot of questions about whether VMware is the way to go or whether VirtualBox is an option. A lot of questions about how the labs are going to work. So I suppose it's probably a good time to transition across to that.
Yeah, okay. So
and thanks heaps for answering the questions in the webinar itself, and we'll jump into, I guess, the demonstration bit, if anyone wants to hang around.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Guy. So I'd recommend VirtualBox. I am building or have built the exam assessment virtual machine in VirtualBox for it to be, but it will be in an OVA.
Okay, so I think I'm not the only one who's lost sound. Oh, hello, Jeremy. We just lost you for a sec.
Okay. I'm back.
5 and 5 now. 5 and 5. 5 and 5.
I'm not sure what happened there.
Alrighty. I think we've lost you again, Jeremy. Test 1, 2. I can also take requests for anyone who would like me to sing. Talk about the chat, of which there is much to say. I hope we are all paying attention in there. Tell you what, if Jeremy doesn't come back shortly, we've already run quite long, and thank you all for your patience. There's still 800 of you left. We might just get Jeremy to record a little bit of a demonstration session and add that as a separate resource on the learn.it masters page, unless in the next sort of 30 seconds or so, no, it looks like he's gone altogether. He might be logging back in. I'll wait around and maybe just go through what we're going to cover in the next few weeks. And the course details. So after each webinar, we try and get the recording out within 24 hours. We'll also have an amended slide deck because, of course, we amend it as we go in preparation for each webinar. Resources will be available, links to books or readings that Jeremy thinks are pretty important. And then sort of we'll announce all of that through email to anyone who's enrolled in the course. For anyone who had a friend who wasn't able to get in because we've got the maximum attendees of 1,000, just a Zoom feature. There will be a recording available, so you can tell them that. And other than that, next week we'll have a chat about, just 1 second, I'll get my learn.it masters page up. So make sure you visit that learn.it masters page, by the way. That's where all the forums are and the quizzes. But next week we'll be talking about enumeration and vulnerability scanning. Focusing on identifying targets to further investigate. So it looks like Jeremy's back. We'll see whether it works. Otherwise, we'll cut it out and we'll call it a night, and we'll figure out a way to get the information to you.
I'm back.
Hello.
Hello. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Welcome back.
Thanks. I'm not sure what's happened there. I lost network connection. From my laptop only, so my laptop's had a bit of a struggle just then. I should really be expecting that, running a pen testing course. I'm assuming everyone's having a good go at the hacking my machine at the moment. Just obviously joking there.
Or is he?
Yeah.
So we just went through all of the learn.it masters page thingamajigs.
Okay.
And now we can go straight to your demonstration.
Yeah, so I was just discussing about VirtualBox and VMware when it cut out last time. And I just recommend VirtualBox because for this assessment, that's what it will be in. And it can muck up the services running on a virtual machine if you need to reinitialize the hardware underneath a virtual machine. So sometimes VMware has a different emulation of networks, so you get a different device name and it can muck things up. So if it's open, I would suggest just trying to do it in VirtualBox. You may be familiar with VMware, but I guess as the learning experience, it'll be good to get to know VirtualBox as well. Now, for that, hang on, I was sharing that before. So what I might do is share my entire desktop. So for this environment,
all right, looks like we might have to call it a night. We will get Jeremy to record his demonstration. I hope you all have enjoyed the webinar. Thanks very much for joining us. And do please join us next week. Any of the questions we didn't get to, I'm sorry, there were 50 at the end of the webinar, so there was just no way we could get to them all. Yeah, but this is where the forums come in. Make sure you send in your questions. There's literally thousands of you, so it's a great resource to take advantage of. Thank you to Chantal and Sophie for hanging around. Thank you to Jeremy, if you can hear me, for a really interesting lecture. We'll see you all this time next week. Have a good week. Bye-bye.